I want you to just picture a scenario for a second. If you work in any kind of professional services, and like particularly if you are navigating the trenches of the legal field, this is probably going to trigger a very specific, um, painfully relatable stress response.
Oh, I already know exactly where you're going with this.
Right, you probably do. So you have just wrapped up a contained, well-executed piece of work for a client. You delivered it on time. The legal analysis is sharp. You send it over feeling that, that momentary rush of professional satisfaction.
Best feeling in the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the client replies quickly, they thank you, but then they add those 5 dreaded words at the very bottom of the email. While you're in there, could you... Ugh.
Yes, while you're in there. It is, it's basically the professional equivalent of finding a leak in the hull of a ship right after you thought you just finished patching it.
That is a perfect way to describe it.
And the camouflage it wears is that it always seems so tiny, Like, while you're in there, can you just take a quick look at these 3 other ancillary agreements?
Yeah, or like, oh, and there's this dispute from last quarter we've been ignoring. Just give it a quick glance.
Oh, yeah, just a quick glance.
And because you did a great job on the main task, well, because you want to be viewed as a trusted advisor, your instinct is to just absorb it, right? It seems microscopic in the moment.
Totally microscopic.
But our mission for this deep dive is to pull back that camouflage entirely. We are looking at this really fascinating July 2026 analysis that exposes how these microscopic extra requests, what we officially call scope creep, are acting as the silent, systemic financial bleed.
Yeah, it's a massive bleed.
We are talking about the erosion of law firm profit margins, the subtle destruction of client relationships, and frankly, the complete burnout of in-house legal teams who are just forced to absorb this endless ocean of invisible work.
The problem with scope creep, the real insidious part, is that it doesn't announce itself with sirens. It is a quiet erosion. And the source material we are examining today, it doesn't just diagnose the bleeding. It actually introduces a definitive tourniquet.
Which is so desperately needed.
It really is. So we are going to look closely at the framework developed by the International Institute of Legal Project Management, or the IILPM.
Okay.
Their approach completely dismantles the idea that setting boundaries is somehow, bad for client relationships. In fact, it argues the exact opposite.
Yeah.
But to understand the cure, we have to look under the hood of the actual financial and relational damage first.
Let's start right there, actually, with the anatomy of the bleed. Our source provides an opening case study that I think perfectly illustrates the trap here.
It's a very common trap.
It is. So you have a valued commercial client who refers work to your firm regularly. They asked for a supplier contract review. You agree to a fixed fee arrangement via a quick email exchange, and you open the matter.
Standard stuff.
Right. Your associate digs into the contract, spots a few liabilities, and flags them. And then the client sends the reply, "Thanks. While you're in there, can you check the indemnity clauses in these 3 other agreements?"
And there it is.
There it is. But I want to look at this from the perspective of, say, a senior partner who is terrified of client attrition, right?
Sure.
This is a client who pays their bills. The work they are asking for in that follow-up email isn't technically complex. It's just a quick check of some clauses. If I'm the partner, my instinct is that saying no or immediately asking for more money just creates unnecessary friction.
Right. You don't want to rock the boat.
Exactly. Doesn't absorbing a few hours of associate time just make me a good low-friction partner to their business? Like, isn't that just good relationship management?
See, that is the exact internal monologue that precedes massive profit loss.
Really?
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm?
It is rooted in a fundamental misunderstanding of the economics of time. When you look at the hard math provided in the analysis, that a justification of, building goodwill, it completely disintegrates.
Walk me through that math.
Okay, so the source explores the psychology of the write-off. Imagine that billing partner at the end of the month, right? They're reviewing the pre-bills. They see the associate logged 6 extra hours dealing with those 3 additional indemnity clauses and that random dispute.
Okay, 6 hours.
The partner looks at that, feels a spike of anxiety about having an awkward conversation regarding a blown budget, and they just write off the 6 hours.
They just wipe it out.
Exactly. They press a button, the hours vanish from the invoice, and a partner convinces themselves they just made a strategic relationship investment.
But they didn't. They just subsidized the client's business operations with their own firm's overhead.
Precisely.
Let's look at the baseline numbers the source uses. It uses South African rands to make the point.
Right.
So if that law firm operates with a blended hourly rate of, let's say, 3,500 rands. Those 6 unrecovered hours mean 21,000 rands of value was generated, delivered, and then just immediately vaporized.
Vaporize is the correct term there because the firm still paid the associate's salary for those 6 hours.
Right.
They paid the overhead, the software licenses, the real estate costs. I mean, they incurred the entire expense of production without capturing a single cent of the revenue.
That is painful.
And the damage accelerates exponentially in a fixed fee dynamic, which the source highlights as a particular disaster zone for unmanaged scope.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah, let's say that original supplier contract review was priced at a fixed fee of 15,000 rands.
Okay.
When you absorb a 21,000 rand overrun on a 15,000 rand fixed fee, you haven't just narrowed your margin. You have effectively discounted the engagement by 140%.
Wait, wow. Let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around that mechanism properly.
Sure.
You are essentially saying that by trying to avoid friction, the firm has actually paid for the privilege of doing the client's extra work. Like, you delivered 36,000 rands worth of legal analysis, but you capped your revenue at 15,000.
That's exactly it. You paid to do their work. And this is where the macro scale becomes terrifying for firm management.
How so?
Well, the analysis points out that if this pattern repeats across just 12 matters in a single quarter, which, by the way, for a mid-sized firm, is an incredibly conservative estimate.
Very conservative.
Right. You are looking at hundreds of thousands of rands in unrecovered value. But because it doesn't show up on a profit and loss statement as a discrete line item called, money lost to cowardly scoping.
Oh, man. Cowardly scoping.
Yeah, because it's not labeled like that, management just ignores it. It hides inside write-offs. It hides in realization rates that continuously hover around 75%. And it hides in stagnant billing rates.
Stagnant rates, right, because partners feel they can't ask for rate increases when their clients are already complaining about bills.
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle.
So the financial hemorrhage is basically a mathematical certainty at that point. If you are a partner listening to this right now and you're looking at your realization rates, that 140% discount scenario is likely happening in your practice today.
Almost certainly.
But the text pivots here to an angle that I actually find far more insidious. We tell ourselves we are eating the hours to protect the relationship, right?
We do.
But the analysis argues that absorbing extra work actually destroys the equilibrium of the relationship. So how does giving a client free work damage the dynamic?
It comes down to operant conditioning.
Operant conditioning, like psychology.
Yes. When you absorb overruns without adjusting the fee or the timeline, you are implicitly training the client to ignore your boundaries.
Ah, I see.
You are teaching them that your initial scoping conversation was merely a formality. I mean, if a client learns that the scope can expand infinitely without the budget ever moving, they learn that your price is just a soft starting point for negotiation, not a reflection of reality.
That makes perfect sense. In software engineering, they talk about feature creep. Have you heard?
Oh, yeah. Feature creep is brutal.
Right. So a client asks for one extra button on a dashboard. It seems tiny to the client, but the engineer knows that adding that one button requires rewriting the entire underlying database architecture, changing security protocols, and overhauling the user interface.
Exactly.
If the engineer just says, sure, and does it for free, the client assumes buttons are cheap and easy to build. The next week, they come back and ask for 10 more buttons.
And you can't blame them.
No, you can't. So the lawyer who says, sure, I'll review these 3 extra indemnity clauses, is basically teaching the client that legal analysis is cheap and infinite.
That is a highly accurate parallel. You establish the new rule by failing to enforce the old one. In the legal context, this creates what the source calls an unequal partnership.
Which means what, exactly?
It means you're guaranteeing one of two outcomes. Either you're going to reach a breaking point and have the severely combative fee dispute months down the line.
Which is awful.
Right, which will damage the relationship far more than a professional scoping conversation on day one would have. Or your firm is going to accept being forever underpriced, and you'll just quietly resent the client while doing their work.
Neither outcome resembles a trusted advisory relationship. It kind of reminds me of letting a toddler push their bedtime back by 5 minutes every night.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, like just 5 more minutes. And eventually, bedtime is midnight, and you have no one to blame but yourself because you're the one who set the precedent.
You built the monster. And while we are analyzing this through the lens of external law firms billing clients, the text forces us to look at an entirely different ecosystem where this problem is actually magnified.
Okay, where is that?
We have to talk about in-house legal departments.
Oh, right.
If you are an in-house counsel listening to this, your reality is fundamentally different because your clients are the internal business units: sales, marketing, HR.
And there is no invoice at the end of the month.
Exactly. Which removes the only natural friction that exists to slow scope creep down.
Wow, yeah.
In private practice, the fear of having to justify the final invoice at least forces someone in the firm to consider the extra work. But in-house, there is no financial deterrent for the internal business units.
So they just ask for whatever they want?
Pretty much. The marketing department, or the sales team, operates with an institutional expectation that the legal department is this limitless prepaid resource. It doesn't impact the marketing budget to ask legal to review 50 minor vendor agreements.
So it's essentially a triage situation, but without a tourniquet. Internal units just forward emails saying, hey, legal, can you give us a quick look?
And the consequence is catastrophic for the quality of the work.
Because they just have too much to do.
Because human capacity is finite. When an in-house team lacks a framework to define and contain the scope of requests, they just absorb the endless volume. They try to do it all.
Which means the quality drops.
Exactly. Because they are rushing to clear a queue that never empties. The deep, strategic legal analysis gets replaced by shallow, reactive box checking. And the irony, the profound injustice that the text specifically calls out here, is the reputational damage that follows.
Right, because when the legal team is buried under the weight of all this unmanaged scope, the rest of the business doesn't say, wow, legal is handling an unprecedented volume of our requests.
Well,
they say, legal is a bottleneck. Legal is slow.
Exactly. They get branded as reactive and inefficient. Not because they lack legal competence, mind you, but because they lack the operational structure to contain the work.
That is so unfair.
They're drowning in scope creep, and their reward is being blamed for being wet. This dynamic, whether it's in a law firm losing margin or an in-house team losing their minds, is why the article insists on fundamentally redefining how the legal profession views scope.
Let's shift into that redefinition then, because this is where we move from diagnosing the illness to prescribing the cure.
Yeah.
But I want to pause and address the elephant in the room here.
Okay, let's hear it.
The moment we start talking about project management or scope definition, I know what you, the listener, are probably picturing. You are picturing filling out a 40-page project charter, mapping out complex Gantt charts, and basically drowning in administrative bureaucracy just to get clearance to read a 3-page non-disclosure agreement.
Oh, completely.
It feels like adding heavy administration to an already incredibly heavy workload.
That is the most common misconception, and honestly, it is the primary reason legal professionals resist project management in the first place.
It sounds exhausting.
But the source explicitly targets this myth by introducing the Legal Project Management, or LPM, standard as defined by the International Institute of Legal Project Management.
Okay.
The IILPM philosophy is very clear. Proper scope definition is not a bureaucratic nightmare. It is a disciplined, foundational practice that creates operational safety.
Operational safety. I like that phrasing.
Yeah, it does not mean drafting a massive schedule. It means establishing firm professional boundaries before a single document is opened.
The framework treats scope definition as the absolute bedrock of the matter. And it lays out 4 specific pillars that must be established before the billable clock even starts ticking.
4 very important pillars.
Right. I want to walk through these, but I also want to, pressure test them a bit to see how they actually function in the real world.
Fair enough. The 4 pillars of the IILPM standard are straightforward, but they are rigid. Number 1, the scope must be clear.
Okay.
Number 2, it must be mutually understood by both the legal professional and the client. Number 3, it must be documented. And number 4, and this is the real operational shield here, it must explicitly state what happens when extra work is requested.
That 4th pillar is what neutralizes the while you're in there email.
Exactly.
If you've already agreed on the protocol for extra work, the emotion is just removed from the equation.
Completely removed.
But there is a nuance in the text that elevates this from basic administration to high-level strategic advisory, I think. It's the insistence on identifying the why, the commercial objective.
This is where true legal project management diverges from basic task management. The source argues that scoping cannot simply be a catalog of tasks.
Right, you can't just list stuff.
Exactly. You cannot just write, we will review contracts A, B, and C. You have to uncover the client's underlying intent. What is the actual commercial outcome they are trying to achieve, and why does the timeline actually matter?
I really want to dig into the mechanics of this. Let's use the example from the text. A client asks for a standard contract review.
Okay.
That review could be preparation for a routine transaction, or it could be risk mitigation right before a highly contentious board meeting. If the physical act of reading the contract is the same, why does understanding the intent change the physical boundaries of the scope so drastically? Like, how does the why dictate the what?
It changes the scope drastically because it dictates the depth of the analysis and the format of the deliverable.
Okay, tell me more.
If a client says, review the supplier agreement, and you fail to ask why, your default as a lawyer is exhaustive risk mitigation, right?
Yes, find every possible hole.
Exactly. You might spend 10 hours analyzing every microscopic indemnity clause, every limitation of liability, and produce this gorgeous 20-page memorandum detailing every conceivable risk.
Which is objectively brilliant legal work. You've protected the client from absolutely everything.
But it might be entirely useless to them.
Wait, really? Useless.
What if their underlying objective was simply to confirm whether there is an exclusivity clause that prevents them from signing a competitor by Friday?
Oh. Oh, wow.
Right. They didn't need a 20-page risk memo. They needed a one-paragraph email answering a binary question.
Yes or no?
Exactly. If you didn't know the objective, you overscoped the matter. You delivered more than they needed, which means you burned hours they will inevitably resent paying for.
Okay, that makes so much sense. You over-engineer the solution. But what about the reverse? How does ignoring the commercial objective lead to underscoping?
Consider the same request. Review this contract. You decide to do a standard, high-level pass, just noting the major commercial terms.
Okay, keeping it brief.
But what if their actual objective was to prepare that contract for a hostile acquisition, where every single liability will be aggressively weaponized by the buyer's counsel?
Oh, yikes.
Your standard review missed the point entirely because you didn't know the commercial context. Understanding the intent allows you to draw the boundaries intelligently.
So how would you handle it if you knew?
It allows you to say, because your goal is to survive a hostile acquisition audit, we must exclude a standard review and instead perform a deep dive liability analysis. This dictates a higher fee and a longer timeline.
It takes scoping from being this, defensive administrative tour and turns it into a deeply strategic conversation. You are aligning the legal work with the business reality.
Exactly. You become an advisor, not just a task executor.
Okay. With that philosophy established, let's look at the actual tools the text provides. It offers a 5-step framework that any professional can implement literally immediately.
Yes, and the first 3 steps were all about the setup. Let's look at step 1. Define the matter in writing before work begins.
And to reassure the listener who fears bureaucracy, the text explicitly notes that this definition does not need to be a 50-page charter.
God, no.
For many matters, a well-structured paragraph or a tight bulleted list in the engagement email is perfectly sufficient. But the non-negotiable rule is that it must be documented and acknowledged before the billable work commences.
Right. And within that short paragraph, the framework emphasizes what I think is honestly the most powerful weapon in the entire text, the use of exclusions.
Yes, exclusions.
It's not just about stating what you will do. It's about weaponizing what you won't do.
Exclusions are essentially the concrete walls of your scope. The text gives a stark comparison to illustrate this, doesn't it?
It does. If your scope statement simply reads, "We will review the supplier agreement," you have essentially handed the client a blank check for your time.
Because it's too vague.
Exactly. In the client's mind, any ancillary document, any historical email thread related to the supplier, and any future dispute with that supplier technically falls under the umbrella of reviewing the supplier agreement.
You've left the door wide open for feature creep.
But observe how the dynamic changes when you utilize exclusions. The statement becomes, "We will review the master supplier agreement dated 15 March 2025. Ancillary agreements, historical correspondence, and related disputes are explicitly excluded from this engagement."
It's incredibly clean. If you are listening right now and you have a standard engagement letter open on your screen, look at your scope clause. I guarantee it tells the client what you are doing. But does it definitively list 3 things you are not doing?
Probably not.
By stating the exclusions up front, you completely remove the emotion. When the client inevitably asks you to look at an ancillary agreement, you aren't saying no and risking the relationship. You're simply pointing back to the mutual agreement.
It creates psychological safety for both parties, which leads directly into step 2. Identify the actual objective. We discussed the theory of the why, but the framework formalizes this as a mandatory step at the inception of the mandate.
And the text gives us a golden question for this step. If you take nothing else away from this deep dive, write this question down.
So good.
The question you must ask at the start of every matter is, What does a successful outcome look like for you on this matter, and by when?
It is an elegant operational mechanism.
Yeah.
It forces the client to articulate their business goal rather than just handing over a legal task.
Right, they have to think about it.
If they answer that a successful outcome is having executive talking points for a board meeting on Thursday, well, you instantly have the parameters for your scope, you know the timeline, and you know the deliverable is a summary document, not a massive treatise.
And you use their definition of success to justify the boundaries you set in step 1.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've written the scope with hard exclusions. We've identified the commercial objective to ensure we are aligned. Now we hit step 3. Build scope change into your engagement terms.
Crucial step.
I really want to know how this physically looks in an engagement letter. How do you draft a clause that protects you without sounding, hostile to the client?
It is about framing change management as a standard professional process, not an adversarial confrontation.
Okay.
The engagement terms should include a standard boilerplate provision that outlines the protocol. It should state clearly that any requests for work outside the defined scope will be quoted separately before that work commences.
Simple enough.
And it must clarify that the original fee estimate only applies to the original defined scope.
The beauty of this is the structural protection it gives you. You negotiate the rules of engagement when everyone is happy and excited to start the project.
When tensions are lowest.
Exactly. So when the scope inevitably creeps in week 3, you don't have to agonize over how to bring it up. The protocol is already established.
It functions as a dual protection mechanism. It protects the law firm's profit margins by ensuring extra work is actually billed. But crucially, it protects the client from the thing they fear most: surprise invoices.
Nobody likes a surprise invoice.
No client wants to open a final bill and see a number vastly higher than the original estimate because of invisible overruns. By building change management into the terms, you are actually providing exceptional client service. You're giving them predictability.
So those are the first 3 steps. The foundation is poured. But setting the scope is the easy part.
Oh yeah, that's just the beginning.
Maintaining it when the real work begins, when the emails are flying and the deadlines are tight, that is where the battle is actually won or lost. Let's move into the execution phase. Step 4 is track against the original definition.
This step forces professionals to confront the reality of how scope drift actually happens. The source refers to it as an invisible accumulation.
Invisible accumulation, I like that.
Scope creep rarely happens in one massive request. It happens through a 5-minute phone call on a Tuesday, a quick follow-up email on a Thursday, request to just review this one extra page on Friday.
Just a series of tiny favors.
Yeah. And individually, none of these micro-requests feel significant enough to trigger a formal scope review protocol.
It's death by 1,000 cuts. But how does a lawyer actually track that in real time? I mean, if I'm an associate billing in 6-minute increments across 15 different active files, I definitely don't have time to cross-reference the original engagement letter every time the phone rings.
That's a fair point.
So what is the actual mechanism for tracking?
The framework suggests building matter management habits into the tools you already use. It is not just about keeping the engagement letter in a drawer. It is about visibility.
Visibility, okay.
For instance, many modern legal billing software platforms allow you to set budget alerts at, say, 50% and 75% of the estimated fee.
Oh, that's smart.
When that alert triggers, it forces the responsible practitioner to pause and evaluate the work done against the scope definition. Alternatively, it means incorporating a 2-minute scope check into weekly team huddles. The mechanism varies, but the principle is real-time tracking.
So it's like a GPS on a long road trip.
Yeah.
If you only look at the budget when the file is closed at the end of the month, the damage is already done. You wouldn't look at a map only after driving for 12 hours.
Right, you'd end up in the wrong state.
Exactly. You have to check your telemetry while you are still flying the plane. If you see that you've burned 80% of the budget, but you are only halfway through the defined tasks, you immediately know you have a scope drift problem.
Exactly. Identifying the drift while the matter is still active is what empowers you to execute Step 5, which the text identifies as the most critical, highest leverage improvement a professional can make.
And what is Step 5?
Proactive communication.
Proactive communication. Surfacing the issue before the damage is permanent.
It fundamentally alters the psychology of the client relationship. Surfacing a scope change to a client before the additional work is executed and providing a revised fee estimate for that new work is an entirely different conversation than having a defensive billing dispute after the invoice is sent.
Let's role play this for a second, because the phrasing is everything. It's the difference between asking for permission and begging for forgiveness. Instead of doing the work and hoping they pay the bill, you pause the work. You call the client and say, "We received the additional dispute documents you sent over. We are happy to review them. However, as they fall outside the exclusions we agreed upon in our initial scope, analyzing them will require an additional 5,000 rands and push the deliverable to Monday. Would you like us to proceed with this additional work, or should we stick to the original plan?"
That phrasing is absolutely perfect because it empowers the client. You are giving them the authority to manage their own budget.
They get to decide.
Right. If they say no, they don't want to spend the extra money, that is an operational victory. You don't do the extra work, you don't burn the unbillable hours, and you preserve your margin.
And if they say yes?
If they say yes, they have explicitly pre-approved the extra cost, there is no surprise invoice, and there is no write-off. The source connects this directly to the broader stakeholder communication disciplines taught in the IILPM framework. It removes the anxiety from the lawyer and places the commercial decision in the hands of the client.
Okay, so the 5 steps are incredibly logical. Define in writing with exclusions, identify the commercial objective, build change protocols into engagement terms, track against the definition in real time, and communicate proactively.
It's a solid system.
It is, but I need to push back on the application here. Legal work is inherently volatile. I can see this 5-step framework working perfectly for a predictable, routine employment contract. But how does this survive the chaos of complex legal environments?
That is a critical operational question, and the source directly addresses the reality that scope management is not one size fits all.
Good.
The context of the legal environment dictates how the framework is applied. The article details several distinct practice variations, exploring how the principles adapt. Let's start with one of the most volatile environments, M&A transactions.
No, in M&A, the entire point of the exercise is discovery. You don't know what you're going to find in the data room until you get in there. How can you possibly define the scope of the unknown?
In an M&A transaction, scope evolution is not a failure of planning. It's a structural expectation. As you conduct due diligence, you are basically guaranteed to surface hidden liabilities, toxic contracts, or compliance issues that require deep investigation.
So how do you scope it?
The scoping strategy in M&A isn't about locking down a rigid, unmoving boundary. It is about establishing a clear, pre-agreed process for how those inevitable discoveries will be triaged, budgeted, and approved. You scope the initial due diligence phase, and you explicitly state that remediation or deep investigation of discovered issues will be scoped in subsequent separate phases.
Ah, okay. What about litigation? That seems even harder to scope because you have zero control over opposing counsel. If their entire strategy is to bury you in frivolous motions, you can't predict your workload. How do you write an airtight scope for a volatile, hostile environment?
Litigation is fascinating from a project management perspective. The scope is technically bounded by the pleadings, you know what the core arguments are, but the effort required to prosecute or defend each step fluctuates wildly based on opposing counsel's tactics.
Exactly.
The LPM framework adapts to this through phased scoping and the heavy use of assumptions. You don't try to scope a 3-year trial. You scope phase 1, discovery. And you base it on explicit assumptions documented in the engagement letter.
Give me an example of an assumption.
For example, you write, this scope assumes document review will not exceed 50 gigabytes,
Right.
and opposing counsel will cooperate with standard deposition schedules.
I see. So if opposing counsel decides to go scorched earth and dumps 500 gigabytes of unstructured data on you on a Friday night, the assumption you documented has been violated.
Precisely.
And that violation immediately triggers step 5, proactive communication. You go to the client and say, the assumption we based our budget on has changed due to opposing counsel's actions. Here's the revised scope and budget to handle the new data. You aren't taking the financial hit for the other side's hostility.
Exactly. You use the assumptions to protect the firm from the volatility. The framework also addresses the unique dynamics of in-house teams, which we touched on earlier.
Right. For the in-house team drowning in requests from internal business units who expect free work, how do they apply this?
For in-house legal departments, applying this framework is about institutionalizing a triage and capacity management system. They aren't using scope definition to generate an invoice. They are using it to establish service level agreements, or SLAs.
SLAs, okay.
It means creating an intake portal where the marketing department can't just forward an email, but must actually answer the question, what is the commercial objective and timeline?
That makes them think before they ask.
Exactly. And it allows the general counsel to demonstrate to the executive board exactly how much capacity the legal department has, using real data. It changes the narrative from legal is a bottleneck to legal is operating at maximum capacity based on these documented scopes, and if you want more output, you need to approve headcount for another lawyer.
It turns anecdotes into data. That's huge. And finally, the text mentions repeat instruction engagements, things like standard commercial leases or high-volume immigration visas.
For routine, high-volume work, the goal of the framework is hyper-predictability. You refine the scope definition and the exclusions so tightly over successive matters that your pricing becomes perfectly accurate.
So there's no surprises at all.
Exactly. You eliminate the variance, which allows you to move safely into alternative fee arrangements or productize the legal service entirely. It turns the practice into a highly profitable, well-oiled machine.
So the framework truly does adapt to the environment. And I think it is vital to mention the architect behind the specific course highlighted in our source material.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Because this isn't just academic theory being pushed by a business consultant who has never billed an hour. The text introduces Nicolene Showman-Lau. She has over 20 years of experience running a successful law firm, and she actually designed the Pocket Advisor Applied LPM course.
Which is a critical distinction.
It is. This isn't a generic project management methodology from the construction or manufacturing sector that got awkwardly transplanted into law.
No, it is a methodology forged in the trenches of real legal practice. It was developed by a practitioner who has experienced the pain of scope creep from both sides of the desk. She understands exactly how billing partners, sleep-deprived associates, and demanding clients actually behave in the real world.
The human element.
Yes, the framework accounts for the human element, the fear of conflict, and the chaotic nature of legal work.
Which really brings us to the ultimate conclusion of our deep dive, the systemic fix. Because hearing all of this, the temptation is to rely on individual willpower, right?
Oh, people do it all the time.
A listener might think, okay, I get it. I will just try harder to remember to check my scope next week. But the expert analysis here drives home a hard, unforgiving truth. Individual diligence is not enough.
It will inevitably fail. If your firm's defense against the financial bleed of scope creep relies entirely on a single overworked associate remembering to cross-reference,
it has to be institutionalized. It is not a mood, and it is not a personality trait of a highly organized partner.
Exactly. It connects scoping, budgeting, risk management, and client communication into a unified process. It builds these 5 steps into the matter management software, the intake forms, and the weekly partner meetings so that they're simply not optional.
They just become part of the workflow.
Right. They do not get skipped just because a matter feels familiar or because the client happens to be friendly. The text makes it clear. The cost of failing to build this system is perpetual firefighting. You will spend your entire career putting out operational fires that could have been contained by a single well-written paragraph containing exclusions at the start of the matter.
Perpetual firefighting. That is a grim but highly accurate reality for far too many professionals. So let's recap our journey today.
Let's do it.
We have seen that the while you're in there request isn't just a minor nuisance. It is a massive financial drain that can evaporate hundreds of thousands of rands in unrecovered value. And it subtly destroys the equilibrium of client relationships by training them to ignore boundaries.
Operant conditioning at its worst.
Exactly. But the IILPM framework proves this is entirely curable. By defining the client's actual commercial intent, utilizing the power of clear exclusions, establishing change protocols upfront, tracking in real time, and communicating proactively before doing the work, you can take back control of your profit margins and, quite frankly, take back your sanity.
It is about moving the legal professional from a posture of defensive reactivity to a position of fierce strategic proactivity. And ultimately, it provides a much higher level of predictability and service to the client.
Absolutely. Now, to wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a new angle to ponder, a broader observation that really synthesizes the paradox we've explored today.
I love this part.
Think about this dynamic. Lawyers are rigorously trained, practically from their first day of law school, to spot, analyze, and mitigate every conceivable risk in their clients' contracts. You will argue for hours over the placement of a single comma in an indemnity clause to protect your client from a hypothetical risk that might happen 10 years from now.
It's what lawyers do best.
Right. Yet when it comes to your own operational agreements with those exact same clients, your scoping documents, your engagement terms, your fee estimates, you often operate with a blind hand-shaped trust that leads directly to a financial hemorrhage.
The irony is painful.
It really is.
Yeah.
Why is the legal mind so incredibly adept at protecting others from ambiguity, but culturally resistant to protecting itself? Next time you review a client's contract, look at the precision of the language, and then ask yourself if you would ever let them sign a commercial deal as vague and open-ended as the scope of work you just agreed to.